That's what I want. Okay, first, I would like to say that Emma will be coming. She's just in a meeting right now, so she'll join when she can. I'm saying that more for Halo when she watches that recording. So first of all, I'd like to start with a few announcements that us exec members like got together and talked about. And Morgan, of course, this is new to you, but so we were talking about funding for the book club stuff. And we found that we aren't able to like purchase books and then give them to you to keep, but we are able to purchase books through like our funding and then keep them as like a library. So you would still be able to like check out essentially the book and you're able to use it for that purposes, but it would have to like stay with the club because we're using it as more like a uniform kind of thing. We're definitely like stretching the limits of what we're supposed to be using the money for, but I think we figured out how to do it. And on that topic, the next book that we'll be reading for book club, we picked Sulwe by Lupita Nyong'o, and I probably butchered that name. So we'll have more information come up when we like actually figure out how to buy the books through the club, because this is new to all of us members. We're kind of just figuring things out as we go. And then along that same kind of topic, if you guys haven't been at meetings, this might be a bit new to you, but we are hosting a TESOL conference sometime next month. And a big part of the TESOL conference is to have a guest speaker from a professor or an expert out in the field that's not from the University of Northern Iowa. And we talked to Halal, our club advisor, and she has 3 people in mind that we could invite to the conference to have as guest speakers that we're pretty sure we could get. One of them would be talking about intonation, one of them would be talking about humor, and one of them would be talking about introversion versus extroversion. And if any of you have any preferences or want to hear anything specific, or if anything sounds like interesting to you, feel free to like put that in the chat, email one of us, get to us, think about it, anything there. And then before I move on, just because some of you might be new, I do want to mention that all of these meetings we have are recorded and we have them on our TESOL Club website. Kerrigan, if you would be so kind as to like link that in the chat, if you could get there.
Yeah, I will do it eventually. I have to get it open in a different window.
Yeah, don't worry about it. And if it takes you a while, that's fine. But we have all our recorded meetings from like the past year on there. So if you're ever interested in looking at some of that stuff, it's all there. And then to move on. Oh, what does that mean? I wrote notes for myself. I'm sorry. Well, I did get an email from Hala, and she is our secretary, but she's unable to make the meetings on these days. And just because of the recording system, she has to take our notes through there, through these. So she asked that I could like have some like icebreaker questions to ask so that everyone could get a chance to speak and she could have notes on everyone that's here. So the question that she provided for us to answer tonight is, if you could only read one book forever, what book would it be? And to start with her answer, she said The Valley of Amazement by Amy Tan. And she said she would pick that one because it's very long, has a really good plot line, and it has a lot of cultural aspects that you can learn. I'll wait for myself to go if anyone else would like to start with theirs.
I can go. I'm still trying to find the link to our website, but I'm getting there. If I had to pick one book to read, I don't really know. I would probably honestly, The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak is really good. I've read it like 5 times and I cry every time. So that would make me a little bit sad to read over and over again, but I would do it. So yeah.
I can go if you want. I read Eleanor and Park in like middle school, and every time somebody asks me what my favorite book is, that's what I say. So I would just say that one.
Literally so good. I love it.
For me, I feel like this question's really hard, but the first one that came to mind was Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. That's the book that I've read the most over and over again, so I feel like I could just keep reading it.
I'm an early childhood major, so I read a lot of children books. Um, but like mine would probably be reading Rainbow Fish to my friends at the daycare.
Angel, you probably will be interested in our next book, Sule. It is a picture book, and we'll be focusing on that for our book club. If you didn't already know about it. I'm going to go the opposite direction for a book for me, and I think I would actually pick The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I don't know why I love that book so much. I don't know, but it's my favorite. Okay, and I will turn it over to you, Kerrigan.
I'm almost to the website link, so give me just a hot second and I'll paste that in the chat and then I'll start talking for the actual presentation. I'm like signed into so many different Google accounts that my computer just despises me. Like, it's like, I don't know what you're trying to do. And I'm like, but I'm telling you what I want to do. And it's like, not good enough. So it's fine. We're thriving, doing great. Copy. Oh my gosh, this is so much harder than it should have been. I'm sorry. Paste. There we go. That's our website. Bookmark it if you really want to. I don't know. Check it out. Full disclosure, I don't know if I remembered to put the Zoom link for today's meeting on there. I might have. I don't know. There's a lot going on. Okay. Anyway, I'm going to start sharing my screen. Perfect. Okay. Can you guys see that? Is it still coming up? Okay, cool. Yeah, so my name's Kerrigan. I'm a senior TESOL major here at UNI. And I did this presentation for our TESOL practicum in the fall. And then Jess was like, we should talk about this. And I was like, fun fact, I already have a thing. So here I am talking about the thing. So yeah, I am like by no means claiming to be an expert, but this is just stuff that I think is interesting and that I've researched a decent amount. So we're going to talk about it. All right. Yeah, and if you guys have like questions, I don't know if you will, but if you do at any point, you can interrupt me and I won't be offended. So just do it. All right, so I called this presentation Building Inclusive and Accessible Classroom Libraries because I think those should really be like the goals that we have, like for all students, not just like ELL students or emergent bilingual students, as they're sometimes called. We should have that for all students. Like we should want to pick books and stories that are like representative of the students that we have in class and also books that they can read. So yeah. So just to kind of define like inclusive and accessible. So inclusive, allowing and accommodating people who have historically been excluded. When we think about this, like in relation to books and in relation to like books for English language learners, this can mean, you know, like having books that have characters of color, having books that talk about different cultures, because, you know, you can go to any library in the United States probably and see tons of books about Christmas, but do we see books about Hanukkah? Do we see books about, you know, all the other holidays that are out there? The answer is probably not, and that's a problem because there are people in schools that go to those libraries that fit those different identities and celebrate those different holidays. So we need to make sure that we're being inclusive of those things. And then accessible, the definition that I kind of chose to focus on is capable of being used or seen. And both of these definitions come from Merriam-Webster, just for the record. I put that in here because I thought that was important, I guess. We don't support plagiarism. It is important. But yeah, so thinking about making books accessible to English language learners, maybe that means, you know, having, even if you're in a fourth grade classroom, having books that have lower reading levels. Maybe it means having books that are higher reading levels. Even for your students that aren't English language learners, like there'll be students that read at, below, and above grade level. So I think this really applies to all students, but we can think about it specifically in the context of like English language learners. All right. So we're going to chat a little bit. So we can, and I have put these in the chat because I originally did this for like a bigger group, but since there's like 5 of us, we can just talk about it. But think about like, what were some of your favorite childhood books? And if anybody wants to like share, I was a big Magic Tree House girl, just for the record. Does anybody else have any that they want to share?
My go-to is always Junie B. Jones.
Absolutely. Love her. My attitude is influenced by her to this day.
Full disclosure, I don't remember much about it, but I absolutely love the Rainbow Magic books.
Oh, I've never heard of those. I don't think. Are they the fairy ones?
Absolutely.
Heck yeah. Does anybody else have one that they want to share?
Mine was also the Magic Tree House books.
We love Jack and Annie. We support them wholeheartedly. Okay, so then kind of thinking about those books, I had Raise Your Hand again because this was originally for like a bigger group, but we can think like Angel and I both thinking the Magic Tree House. The main characters in those books, just about as white as you can get. No offense, but like Jack and Annie, like you all you just know by hearing their names for the most part. Yeah, and then thinking about like, were there any characters of color in those books? Does anybody have like one specifically that stands out in your head? Can you think of books with characters of color that you remember reading?
The Magic Tree House, they had some where they go back in time to like the ancient history, like ancient Egypt. Statues
Yeah.
are different.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Did they only show up in the past though? That's so problematic if we're only framing people of color as like ancient people.
Yeah, that's another thing, kind of the next point that I was going to go into. One thing that has been done, there's like tons of children's book research, and I'm a nerd, so I find that like super fascinating. But one thing that they have found is that sometimes like, yeah, there are children's books that have characters of color, but like they don't do like so-called like normal things. So the characters of color, you know, do things that are very like culturally specific. Like maybe they, you know, celebrate Ramadan or something in certain cases, which is great. That's a great thing to have in children's books, but like, why don't they like go to school? Why don't they want to be astronauts? You know, like all kind of the typical like children things. Like those are typically things that you see like white characters in books doing, which I'm not saying we need to get rid of that, but like, why can't all of our children's book characters do the same things and have the same experiences? Can anyone think of like a children's book where they talked about other languages or cultures?
Percy Jackson's Supremacy. Let's talk about that.
That is true, yes. The Magic Tree House kind of comes in here too. They did, you know, go to different places and stuff, but at the same time, like they were going other places, like they weren't ever, you know, like interacting with those people in ways that were normal, I guess you could say. So yeah, that's another thing. And then we kind of touched on this already. The books had very Western experiences and ideals. That's a lot of books. That's not something that's like super uncommon. So we'll kind of keep moving here. So this is a little graphic that's based on a study from University of Wisconsin-Madison. So this shows kind of like the breakdown, I guess you could say, of characters in children's books. So you can see 50% of children's books characters, and this is in books that were published in 2018. So like 3 years ago, you can see that 50% of children's book characters were white. 27% were animals, which is, you know, we love a good dog in a book, but like, really? And then 10% of children's books that were published that year had African or African American characters. And then you can see the number just kind of gets small. I like this picture, this like graphic, because I like that it uses the mirrors. So you can see our poor little friend over here. He's only in 1% of children's books, and he has this little teeny tiny mirror. Whereas our kid down here, that, you know, he sees people that look like him everywhere. He has all these different mirrors. And just like think for a second, like when I saw this, I like, you know, internalized a little bit. Like when I was younger, I think about like all the different things, you know, that I wanted to be when I grew up, and all the different like things I wanted to do. And for me, like reading was a huge part of my childhood. And I'm like thinking, you know, how many of these things did I want to do because I saw like characters in books do them? And like I thought those things were possible because, you know, other little kids that look like me are doing those things in books. Whereas, you know, if you're like a Latinx child or an American Indian or First Nation child, you're not seeing people like you in books. You're seeing, you know, people that maybe look like people you go to school with, but you're not seeing yourself. And for kids, you know, like seeing things and seeing other people like do the things that they think are possible is a really big part. It kind of like shapes their identity in a way and shapes like the goals that they have for themselves. So I think this is just really important to keep in mind. Okay, so then we're going to go back to like the ideas of inclusivity and accessibility. We'll start with inclusive. So what does an inclusive library look like? I think it's really easy to say like it has books with diverse characters in it, which is great. But I think there are other things we can do to kind of like make it more inclusive. So one thing that you can do is like draw attention to books with diverse characters, whether that is like, I've seen classroom libraries that, you know, have books sorted out. So these books are about, they have like African American characters. These books have white characters. These books have Asian American characters. Not as like a way of like separating them out, but just as a way of like drawing attention to, you know, other things that might just kind of get lost in the shelf among all those different books. Another thing is they feature characters from a wide range of cultures with contemporary issues. So one thing that I have seen is kind of like what we said, kids are very heavily influenced, I guess you could say, by what they see in books. That shapes a lot of what kids think is possible or like what can happen. So instead of, you know, seeing like white kids like on the first day of school, why don't we see like Hispanic kids coming to the United States for the first time? Like, why are we not seeing children's books about immigration and all those different really contemporary issues that like real kids are going through? I know sometimes people think that like, you know, that's those kids' real lives. We don't need to like expose them to that in books too. But for some kids, like, you know, that's like a glimmer of hope to them. Like they can see, okay, this character in my favorite book did this really hard thing and they're fine. Like maybe things are going to be fine for me too. So I think that's really important. Outside of that, it's really important to have diverse characters that do normal things. So like I said, like your African American characters should go to school. Like they should want to be astronauts and pilots and teachers and all of those. Whoa, I don't know how that happened. All of those like really, you know, big like high hopes that kids have. Like our diverse characters should not be limited to doing things that are so culturally specific, because that's not realistic. Like people that are culturally diverse in the United States go to school with everyone else. They work with everyone else. So in books, they should be interacting and doing the things that everybody else does. This one is, you know, sometimes easy to overlook, but including diverse authors and illustrators too is really important. Just because, you know, sometimes that can be exposing children to art styles of different cultures. It can be exposing children to the way that different languages can be used in books and languages being used like in tandem or being used together. And again, it's kind of that like role model or like providing an example to students. Like if you have a student, like an African American student that really, really loves to write, they're probably going to look up to those African American authors and illustrators and those people that look like them. So it's important to include those things. And then one blog post that I kind of read when I was looking into this from teachers that are kind of doing some of this work in their classroom. One of them talked about including students in selecting books. So this was like a teacher, I don't remember where they were from, a fairly decent sized city. So they had like a pretty diverse group of students in their classroom. But she talks about how she had a little girl in her class that was Muslim. And she said, you know, there's nobody in our books that wears a hijab or that does the things that I do. So the teacher was like, you know, that's a good point. And that's not really right, is it? And so then because of what that student said and what that student brought attention to, the teacher was able to kind of do some digging and just find some more of those books. And I'm not saying this is easy because publishers and authors do not make this easy. There just isn't as much out there. But I think it says a lot to students if you can be like intentional and track down these things and just like kind of give them that representation. Okay, so then we're going to go to accessible. And this is more so like making sure that everyone in your classroom can use the books in the library that you're providing for them. So like I talked about earlier, you know, having books for multiple grade levels. So if you're a second grade teacher, even if you don't have any ELL students in your classroom, you're going to have kids that are probably reading at a kindergarten level. And you're going to have kids that are probably reading at a 4th, 5th, 6th grade level, just because kids are wild. They don't all learn the same way. And especially for like ELL students, even if you are in like, you know, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, you might think like, okay, all my kids should be reading chapter books. If you have a newcomer ELL student, like literally the only thing they might be able to do is like sit down with the book and look at the pictures. And that's fine. Like that is good for them. That's still like that really crucial like experience with books and literacy. And even if they're just looking at the words and taking them in and they have no clue what they're reading, that's still important. And that's a really important part of like developing literacy. So just, you know, just because maybe you're teaching 4th grade doesn't mean like, all right, no picture books. Like you should still have those options for students. Another thing, this is kind of related, books with varying structures is also really important. Because like I said, you know, your 4th grade newcomer ELL student might truly only be able to look at pictures in a book to follow the story. And that's fine. Like if that's what they can do, that's what they can do. And it's still a really important like experience for them. You know, including chapter books is also good. And something that I think is kind of becoming like, I don't know, like a buzz topic almost in education and just literacy is wordless books. And I think these can be really good for like all age levels, honestly, because they have some that are like super complex that like older kids I think could do a lot with. And again, for some like students, I'm thinking like newcomer or like ELLs with a very low English proficiency. Like that is going to be super great for them because they can sit down with a book and they can follow the story and see what's going on. But they don't feel like they're being held back by those words that they just don't know or can't read. But having a variety of everything in your classroom and in your library, I think is just a really good way to ensure that everybody can find something that they enjoy and that they're capable of reading. Another thing to think about, this is like super simple, but just like the organization of your library. And I'm thinking like physically, like if you have kindergartners, you should probably have shelves that are like low to the ground, like with the books that you're okay with them like getting at and going through. But just making sure that like things are organized in a way where it's super accessible for kids. The kids know where to find things, what to do with things when they're done, that kind of stuff. And then one thing that another blog that I read by a couple teachers that are kind of working on these things in their classroom. They talked about how in their classroom, let me back up a little bit. Like when I was in middle school, we did like AR, like reading levels, you know, So you had, in my like school library, you had like a certain dot color that was like the level that you were on. So you could only do like your dot color and below, you couldn't go above. The teachers in this like article that I read talked about how they don't believe in that. They think that all books should be available to all of their students, you know, even if the students aren't going to be able to read and fully comprehend every single word, it's still like that experience with literacy that is really, really important for students. And so one thing that they talked about is they have like book tasks is what they call them that their students can do. So maybe it's like, you know, look at this, look through this book and write down 5 different words that you don't know. And then you have to figure out what those words are. Because it's still a way for them to interact with like books that they're interested in. Even if they aren't fully comprehending it, they're still getting that experience and doing work that they need that's going to develop those literacy skills. Yeah, so that is kind of the accessibility piece. And then why do we need inclusive and accessible libraries? I think this is probably pretty clear, but books that represent students and books that students are capable of reading create students that love reading, which is really important. There's a lot of, you know, research out there that states, you know, that a love of reading and students that have really positive experiences with reading perform better academically, just because reading does become such a big part of all other subject areas at certain points in your academic career. So I think this is just really important to keep in mind. Okay, so now we're going to talk just a little bit about like some books and authors to avoid, because some are kind of a yikes. So now nobody get mad at me here. Let me explain a little bit. So I am not saying that you can't have classic books in your classroom, because I think that classics have a place. But I also think that you have to set the expectation with your students that, you know, some of the things that get talked about in these books are not the way that we talk about things in people today. So like Little House on the Prairie, there are a lot of really not so great things that are said and scenes with like Native Americans. But like that was the time then, and I get that. But at the same time, like if you let students read that and you say nothing, you're kind of giving them and like telling them that that's still okay in a way. And like, yes, most students probably kind of have a sense that that's not right, but at the same time, like they're little, you have to kind of tell them these things sometimes. So I think if you are going to, you know, have classics and stuff in the classroom, you just have to be ready to have those conversations with students, and know that if a student like asks you about something, like you can't just brush it under the rug, because that doesn't solve anything. And then our good old buddy, Dr. Seuss, he's been in the news a lot lately. I wrote this in like November, so this was before this was like a contemporary issue. But yeah, Dr. Seuss does have a lot, not all of his books, but there are some pretty good issues going on in some of those. So for example, in some of his books, he portrays Black and African-American characters as monkeys. I don't think I have to tell you that that's wrong. I think we all kind of have an idea that that is very not right. In his books, this was like a Dr. Seuss analysis study. It's a wild time. There's some wacky stuff on Google Scholar if you really get to like digging deep. But it talked about in Dr. Seuss books, there are over 2,200 characters. Like considering, you know, main characters, minor characters, the whole thing. And only 45 of those over 2,200 characters are characters of color. And they're almost always represented negatively, whether it's in like very stereotypical roles, or like as animals, which is very problematic. And also just thinking back to like English language learners, students that are learning English, Dr. Seuss books literally make no sense. And like, I get that that's like the point of them and it's kind of fun, but at the same time, like if you don't know English, like that just adds like 5 more layers of complexity that you have to kind of think about and work through. So with our buddy, Dr. Seuss, I thought it would be kind of, I don't want to say fun because racism isn't fun, but like, I thought it would be interesting. If I Ran the Zoo is one of his books that is getting pulled from printing, like they aren't going to print it anymore. And one of my roommates actually has the book. She's had it for quite some time. And so I know a lot of, and I'm not trying to like say anything about people in the room or anything like that. But you know, some people just don't understand why Dr. Seuss books are being like pulled from publication and stuff. So I thought, looking specifically at this book, it would be interesting to kind of look at some of the passages and the reasons why these are getting pulled from printing. So I marked out 2 spots in this one. So I'll like read through it and we can just kind of let it set in, I guess. So if you guys haven't heard of If I Ran the Zoo, it's about this kid who goes to the zoo and there's like things that he would change basically if he was in charge. So that's what it's about. So this one passage says, I'll hunt in the mountains of Zamba Matant with helpers who all wear their eyes at a slant and capture a fine fluffy bird called the blustered. And then it goes on. And you can see this is the picture that goes with that passage. So yeah, that's less than ideal to describe people that way. And also at the time that this was written, the kind of inspiration behind that was that there were a lot of Chinese American people in the United States that were in very like labor-driven roles. So this is just kind of reinforcing those stereotypes, which are problematic. And looking at that now, like if you were an Asian American student, that would not make you feel very good. Then there's another little passage where it says, I'll bring back a gusset, a gherkin, a gasket, and also a gooch from the wilds of Nantasket. First off, just think about this. If you don't speak English, you're like, what the heck is going on? And then it says, and 8 Persian princes will carry the basket, but what their names are, I don't know, so don't ask it. And it's like, why does he not know the people's names? Like, and why do they have to be Persian? Like, there's just so much going on. So that is just like a look into one of the books that's being pulled from publication. Again, I don't think that all Dr. Seuss books are like awful. I just think that there are some that we definitely need to be aware of. And also like for your students, again, that are learning English, maybe not the best choice just because there is so much other like complexity that's going on. And then some books and authors to include. So these are some different lists. I'm just going to go to this one. So there are tons of like book lists that you can look up on the internet. But this one that I did want to point out, thanks Google, I don't want to group my tabs together. We'll get it pulled up so you guys can see it. But this is basically like a Google, but like for children's books. So you can like come over here and look at all these different, yes, I can share the list. I'll put them in the chat when I'm done going through the slideshow. But you can see there's like all sorts of different, like Bindia in India. There are all sorts of different, like you can filter by ethnicity over here. So they have books about like Afghan characters, Algerian, Argentinian, Assyrian, like it just goes on and on and on and on. So this is like a really cool way where if you have like a Congolese student, you can come over here, click on Congolese, see the books that are about Congolese characters, and then see, you know, what can you do to maybe go about getting that book for that student. So I just think this is a really good way. It can help with like very specific situations. So I think it's just a good tool to have and know about. And yeah, I'll put those in the chat here once we get done. This other one that I wanted to go into, this was based on like a professional development like curriculum that they have online on this website. Booksource is the name of the website. So this whole booklet is like the professional development that they have designed for teachers. But the part that I wanted to go through, and I just went right past it. So they have this checklist in here that I think is super cool. It's super long, but it looks through not just like your typical things that you want to include. So it talks about, are there enough books? Are titles up to date? Do they provide content area reading opportunities? But then, and then it goes on with that. You can go in here and look. So does my classroom library have African American protagonists, Asian American protagonists, international characters, Latino and Latina protagonists, Middle Eastern protagonists, and it just goes on and on and on. Different cultures, authors and illustrators. And then this is the part that I think is super cool. It gives a list of like perspectives and experiences to also include. So does it talk about, do you have books that talk about financial hardship, immigrant experience, refugee experience, all that different kind of stuff that is really easy, I think, to not think about when you're just like, thinking about getting books. But this is a good way to kind of make sure you're focusing and getting things that aren't just like the books that, you remember reading or like the books you remember reading. And I can put this link in there too in just a second. Okay, yes, that was all I had. I couldn't remember if I had another slide or not. So here are kind of the sources that I used. They're not in a particular format, but this is the links to them. Yeah, does anybody have any like questions or anything? Let me stop sharing. There we go. And I can get those links real quick too and put them in the chat. Again, I'm not an expert, but
Before we move on to any kind of questions, in case you guys were wondering, Kerrigan, can I ask you to send that to Hayla so she can like put it with the meeting minutes and maybe put your presentation also on the website? That way that's always like available, but it's your work, so.
Yeah, no, I can definitely do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll put these couple that I shared on here on like in the chat, and then I'll put my slideshow just on the website so you guys can get anything else that you want from there. Does anybody have any comments, questions? Thank you for not yelling at me when I talked about Dr. Seuss.
One thing I kind of wanted to ask, because I had perused the Diverse Book Finder website once before. Did it have its own rating system on the website, if I remember correctly?
I think it does. Yeah, here, I still have it pulled up, so let me look. I'm trying to think, because it has like a thing for each book, I think, doesn't it? Or I think in the past I remember seeing.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, here, we'll go to their like recommended first little book. I'm not seeing their like rating on this first one that I clicked on, but it does have like, so here, I'll share again. So down, I'm just on, it was like their little recommended book right at the top of the page. This book. So you can click on it and it'll take you to like the page about the book. And then it has, like the different themes. So it has the genre, the category that they sorted in. And then it has content, which I think is interesting. So like this one is bi/multilingual. And then it also has like settings, ethnicities, gender, which I think is really cool. The races and cultures that are included in it. So they make it really easy, I think, to kind of filter and just like analyze the books that you're thinking about getting, which I think is super cool. And they literally have like, I don't even know, like thousands of different books on here. So there's tons of stuff.
And then I'm going to just rack your brain here. Once again, you said that you're not an expert on this, but let's say you happen to have, if I ran the zoo in your classroom, maybe before this whole Dr. Seuss thing and you never really thought about it, and you have a student that just really wants to read that book, how would you go about it?
So I personally, and I know that not everybody thinks this way, but this is the way I think. I think that kids are never too young to have conversations about racism and all sorts of things like that. So I think that, honestly, you can like sit down with the kid and look at the book and just be like, Okay, so they talk about, these people, whatever kind of, different identity or group you're talking about, they talk about insert group here this way. How would you feel if people talked about or described like you and your friends that way? And, just kind of things like that. I think you can make it as simple as you need to for kids that are that young. But I am in the ship that kids are never too young to talk about that. So I think it's a good time for a conversation.
One thing that I would definitely be hesitant about reading that book is obviously we are older readers and we can pick up on the kind of not really so subtle racism, but I don't necessarily know if kids would be able to pick that out. And some of them probably will, but some of them won't. So do you forcibly point out the racism?
Yeah,
That's where I'm like so on the fence about it. Because
yeah,
I'm with you. I think they need to know, but also do put that into their brains?
yeah. And I've thought about this and I've had conversations with people about it recently because, a lot of people are really fired up about the whole like Dr. Seuss thing. And like I get it, like a lot of people have like really special connections and stuff to these books. And I also get what you're saying, Jess, like they're not going to pick up on it, but I think so many of the problems in our society are tied to like subtle racism and like racism that's just ingrained from us from a really long age. So I guess my kind of thinking is like, why would you not work against it also at a really young age? I know like parents and people like that might not be overly thrilled about it. And I don't think you have to do it from a way that's like, this is me forcing my ideology on you. But like, this is what I think about this. And while we're in, my space, I don't think we need to be reading those books because we want it to be a safe space for everyone. And like, we want everybody to feel welcome. So I don't think you have to go out of your way to point it out, but I also think like it's a good time like for a conversation.
I'll stop asking the hard questions if you three have any other questions.
I'm just curious, have you guys like talked about any of this stuff or like heard anything about like diverse books and that kind of stuff in any of your other classes? Because I know, Angel, you said your early childhood. Jess and I are TESOL, so like we don't really take any of those classes, so I don't really know what gets talked about and what doesn't. So I'm just curious if anybody wants to share like what they know, what they don't know.
It's only like been introduced a couple of times, like they haven't gone into depth about it, but like they've said that it's important to include those books into your library. And we've read a few books in some of my lit ed classes, but they didn't go into much detail about it.
Yeah. I think that's common in a lot of places.
I'm elementary ed, and in one of my classes, we did a read aloud for students at Cunningham School in Waterloo. And like one of the requirements for the books that we picked out is that it had to like be a diverse book. Like it had to show the different kinds of kids that are at that school. And so then like along with that, they talked a lot about like when you're doing PowerPoints and stuff like that and you put pictures in, like be conscious of like, don't pick a picture that has just white kids in it. Stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's really good.
Morgan, I really like that point, and I don't think I've ever had any professor explicitly tell me about like PowerPoint pictures, which is surprising because as TESOL majors, I think we've gone over like many, many, many times about how visuals are super great for like emergent bilingual students. I mean, like I probably would have thought about it in the long run, but well, I've never thought about that.
I've had people talk about too, and I don't know if I can't remember where this was. Maybe in a class, maybe not. I don't know. Or I think it was something I did like summer day camps virtually over the summer. So we did like story hour and stuff once a week. And that was one thing that we did a lot of like looking into just because we were working from home and we had time. But one thing that I know people are trying to like push for is like more diverse like clip art and like stock images, which sounds really basic, but like clip art is like literally all white people, or it's like those like really cringy like textbook photos where you can tell like they had like a quota that they had to meet. So it's like a kid with like a physical disability, like an African American kid and a white kid, like all in one picture. And it's just like, you know, that was orchestrated. Like, this is not, you know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, that was one thing that I saw this summer is that people are like really trying, because like you want to have like little scientist clip art that doesn't look like a crazy like person. Like, you just want like a normal scientist, you know?
That and like stock images. Like,
Yeah.
there's so many like weird and wonderful stock images, and I don't think that's a bad thing by any means, because God, I love the weird and wonderful stock images. But yeah, I don't know if I've seen much diversity out of those either.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a wild world.
By the way, totally off topic. I don't know if any of you know the like stock image grandpa, kind of the meme guy that like he's on the computer and he always gives like a thumbs up or whatnot. I don't know if it's familiar to you, but there's a building here in Cedar Falls and he's on it.
It's the wreck. My boyfriend and I drove by it this weekend. Yep.
Every time I see it, I'm like reminded once again. I'm like, it's him.
The man, the myth, the legend. Yeah. Anybody else have any things they want to discuss, throw out there? All right. Well, that was all I had. So, Jess, I don't know if you have anything else.
Not really. But I guess just to close it up, if you guys are interested, Morgan, I know you said you signed up for TESOL Club or like put your name on a mailing list like your freshman year. I totally reset all the mailing lists this year. So if you're interested in getting back on the, oh goodness, if I can figure out how to type. If you're interested in getting back on the mailing list, I just put my email in the chat. Feel free to email me or email Kerrigan. I think your email is attached to the whole email that you sent out with the College of Ed.
Yes.
So, email
Or if
either of
you,
us.
yeah, or if you like our social media stuff too, a lot of the stuff that gets sent out as an email gets put on social media. So you'd get pretty much the same information.
Unless we forget about something, which sometimes does happen.
That's true.
But I think the next thing you'll be hearing out of us, well, I actually don't know. It'll probably be funding for the book, and we'll probably decide on when we'll hopefully order those in and get those ready for our TESOL Club library. But also you might hear about our conference speaker pretty soon for the TESOL conference. We'll probably try and set those things up here pretty soon. And that will be definitely like a university-wide kind of conference. At least we're hoping more people will come. Otherwise, we meet every 2 weeks. So we will meet again. Oh, goodness. What's the date? So we'll meet again on the 31st of March.
That's what I was going to say too. Even though you guys aren't TESOL majors, like come all the time and bring a friend because it's like nice. Like we have these meetings, obviously a lot of times we talk about like TESOL specific things, but we think that that can be really helpful to like everybody that's going to be a teacher. And also like you guys have really interesting opinions on those things that like we don't always think of. So come bring your friends, talk to us. We're fun.
I often think that we live in our own little TESOL bubble.
It's nice to have interaction.
It's really nice to hear from you guys about what you guys have learned about, what you're interested in, where's the focus, and those kind of things.
Yeah.
Okay, so I will stop the recording.